From 2 Keto LLC, it's Keto Woman Podcast with Daisy Brackenhall.
Hello, Keto Lovelies. I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. Keto has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman Podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs to 20 grams or less per day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds, and the incidental carbs you find in things like dairy. Moderate protein, scale to your lean body mass, and then fat to satiety. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalised keto. I'll be asking my guest each week what their keto looks like to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we can't give you medical advice. It's always best to work with your own doctor because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. This week's extraordinary woman is Jessie Greger. In April 2017, Jessie quit her full-time desk job in the tech world and found herself at mile 1 of the Pacific Crest Trail, the beginning of a 5-month journey that would have her walk the entire span of the United States, hiking from Mexico to Canada, through 3 states and over 2,600 miles, all while ketogenic. Going against the conventional wisdom that through hiking and endurance sports need to be fueled by carbs, she became the first ketogenic through hiker, proving it can be done and paving the way for other hikers and adventurers to tackle their own outdoor achievements and activities. After her fellow hikers and social media follows asked repeatedly where they too could find ketogenic backpacking food, she realised that the meals she had handmade and crafted might help others just like her. And so, in the middle of a mountain range near the Oregon border, her company Next Mile Meals was created. Fully launched in 2018, Next Mile Meals has helped thousands of ketogenic hikers, low-carb campers and adventurers with special dietary needs keep participating in their favourite activities without sacrificing their diet or their health. You can find out more about Jessie and her keto meals at nextmilemeals.com. and follow her on Instagram at nextmilemeals. What an incredible feat of stamina endurance it is to hike so far. I'm in awe of such an achievement. I asked Jessie if she could give me a discount code for the listeners of this podcast, and she kindly said yes. So this is good until the end of the year, so 31st of December 2018. There's a way longer sell-by date on Next Mile Meals, though. They can be stored for years, well into the next hiking and backpacking season. So if you are a keto adventurer, or maybe you are looking for the perfect holiday gift for somebody who is, use the code KETOWOMAN for 10% off all regularly priced meals. Happy adventuring, Keto Lovelies. Welcome, Jessie, to the Keto Woman Podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm getting over this cold that does not want to let go, but I'm feeling a lot better now. Thank you. So, you've been on a massive adventure. It sounds really exciting. I can't wait to hear all about it. Why don't you tell me a bit about yourself before you went on this great adventure, and what led you to choose to do it?
Sure. So a little bit about me. I currently live in San Francisco. I've been here for a number of years. Just like a typical stereotype in this Bay Area, I work at a tech startup. And I was always an avid hiker and backpacker and camper. And then one day I decided that what would be the coolest backpacking trip to do, and that would be to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. The PCT is about 2,600 miles. The trail changes year to year, so the mileage changes year to year as closures and fires happen. So we always like to say it's 2,650 miles or so. And it was always a one-day wish list thing for me, and it was such a cool thing to watch other people do every year. You can do it in a couple different ways. You can do what's called section hiking, which is to just tackle a couple miles here and there, on a weekend trip or a week-long trip. Or there's something called through hiking. Through hiking is to complete one of these long trails in a single season. So after the snows have melted in the mountains and before they start snowing again in the winter. So to through hike one of these trails, and there's the Pacific Crest Trail, the Appalachian Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail, the CDT. So the PCT was always on my oh man, bucket list one day. That'd be so cool to just quit my job and walk off into the woods. But never really gave it much thought. And then the stars aligned and I found myself at the Mexican border with California and about to tackle the whole thing. And 5 months later, I crossed into Canada, having done the entire thing on foot.
Wow. That sounds, incredible and exhausting. I mean, presumably you said you're a fan of hiking and things. You'd done shorter sort of preparation trips for this. I mean, what was the longest hike you'd done before tackling this mammoth hike? Oh yeah, no,
I certainly, everyone that I talk to about this always talks about, well, what sort of preparation did you do for a trail of this length? And I always say the best advice I have for preparing for a thru hike is to just show up. Everyone on that trail either, some people had never backpacked before in their life, and this was just like a finding themselves, philosophical moment for them. And some people like myself were just casual backpackers. So I had done weekend backpacking trips. Luckily my here in San Francisco, we have so many overnight locations. We have the Sierras so close by, down in Southern California or up through Oregon. So weekend trips were a common occurrence for me. The longest trip I had done was about 9 days around Mount Rainier. It's called the Wonderland Trail. So just over a week. And of course it was, Pacific Northwest weather. It was rainy and cold. And I was like, this is terrible, but beautiful. And why do we do this to ourselves? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go longer. So, prior to that, it wasn't this, everyday event for me. It wasn't something I had done months at a time. And so it just seemed like a cool thing to go do. And so I did it.
And so this is full on backpacking out in the wilderness. You're carrying your tent and your cooking gear and everything with you, are you? Do you have any sort of waylay stopping points along the way? Or, well, presumably you must do, because you can't carry 4 to 5 months worth of food.
Yeah, exactly. So
is it literally sleeping in a tent every night, or do you have some stops where you sort of recharge and wash the contents of your backpack and things like that?
Yeah, so most of the time is spent in a tent. You wake up each morning, you pack up your tent, you hit the trail, you hike for 25, 30 miles, you find another campsite, you go to sleep, and you wake up the next morning, you do it all over again. But yeah, you can't carry enough gear or supplies or food or water to make it that entire time. So there are certain spots along the trail that are resupply spots. And so these can be every 3 or 4 days. The longest stretch I went was nearly 11 days through the Sierras, because reaching a town while you're in the middle of a mountain range isn't exactly the most convenient thing. But yeah, we would pack up 4 or 5 days of food, throw them in our bags, hike the next section. And then we would find either we'd walk through a trail town, or we would find a road that connected to a town a little bit away, and we'd hitchhike into town, go to the post office, find our mail drop, or go to a grocery store, resupply there. And then we would do what either called take a zero. So you did 0 miles that day. So we would take a rest day. We would come in the day before, do 0 miles that middle day, and then leave that following day. You could do that's a zero. You could do what's called a Nero, which is you come in and you do nearly 0 miles, and the next day you leave again. And then there's a joke that there's something called a hero, which is you get into town, you leave the same day without any rest in between. Those are not fun. You need the rest days in order to keep going and keep morale up. So the zeros were fun. Occasionally you would do double zeros. And there's this entire trail terminology that I didn't even really understand or grasp until I started hiking. But yeah, so we do mail stops every, 3 or 4 days up to a week or more. The year that I hiked in 2017 was a record snow year. So a lot of the trail towns, especially through the mountainous regions, were closed. So the areas that we would normally have made a resupply stop within 3 or 4 days, so we didn't have to carry too much weight on our back for food, they were actually closed. So we had to pack more between locations. So our bags went from, on the low side, 12, 13 pounds, upwards of 30, 40 pounds with carrying that much food. So it became a bit of a strategic component for hiking for sure.
Yeah, so talking of that, it sounds like the whole exercise, there's quite a lot of strategy involved. If you've presumably got to do a lot of planning before, and planning these mail drops and things, and either have someone at home, I guess, who's sending things for you, or advance posting these mail drops of food that you're needing along the way.
Yeah, so there's 2 different types of resupply you can do. There's stopping in a town and going to a grocery store, which is fine if it has a grocery store. A lot of these tiny little trail towns just have general stores or convenience stores where you can buy a jar of peanut butter, but not much else. What made my hike a bit unique is that I was actually the first person to hike keto. And so hiking ketogenically is incredibly challenging. I didn't realize it would be such an ordeal, not in the physical hiking part, but in the preparation part. And so when I started looking at these resupply strategies, I realized that I didn't have the opportunity as a ketogenic hiker to just go into a general store or Safeway and pick something off the shelf and throw it in my bag and hike. The typical hiker diet was dehydrated potatoes or ramen noodles, anything that's lightweight, calorie dense, that would just kind of power you through the miles up over that next hill and, until you went to sleep that night. And, ketogenic, I don't have the option of having pasta and rice and grains. And if you go into any sort of outdoor gear fitter, if you look at the backpacking meals on the wall, they're all crammed with just cheap carbs. And so I had this moment where I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if it would be possible. I knew I could do it physically, but I didn't think it would be possible logistically to hike this entire thing keto. And so my partner and he and I sat down, and he wasn't going to hike. And so he was going to be my home person. And we realized that the only way to do this was to, 1, make my own meals, from scratch, and 2, have him mail me along the way. So the resupply strategy of running into a grocery store and gorging yourself on Reese's peanut butter cups was not going to be an option for me, that I'd have to find a post office or a mail drop every single location. And so we carefully mapped it out. My partner, Christopher, he had a very detailed spreadsheet that was marking my pace. Okay, well, she's going 30 miles a day, so she'll be at this trail town on this day, so mail this box with this number of days of food. And it was incredibly complicated. But I needed that resupply person because I was not able to do it on the fly like a lot of other hikers. Most hikers use some sort of mix of the two. Not very few people, are just resupplying along the way. It does happen. It's pretty rare. And then the other side of the spectrum is me, which I did entire resupply via mail drop. So had I not been able to make my own food, because nothing else existed on the market for that, and had he not been able to supply me, from our home, then that would not have been possible. But instead, we made the food, we proved it could be done, and I was able to come home and go, you can do endurance sports on keto, and hiking is one of those sports. So yay.
And presumably, did you run into some issues with that? I mean, you just mentioned that, as good as your planning can be, if something happens that means that place is closed or not accessible to you, were there times where you had your scheduled stop that you needed your refuel point for the next however many days, and you didn't have access to it? Did that happen along the way? So
there weren't any crucial spots that had to get missed. Most of the places that were closed, we knew were closed days or weeks in advance. And so we knew we just had to skip them, or he would put, double the day's worth of carry in a prior box for me to carry it through. A couple of times the mail took longer than we expected. And especially early through what's called the desert section, the first 700 miles, we didn't really have a good pace down or expectation of how early did boxes need to be shipped to show up in these really remote rural towns. And so there were a couple of times where I had to like take an extra zero because the mail hadn't shown up yet and just kind of kick it in town for a little bit, which, I might grumble about from a pacing perspective, but I'm sure my feet were incredibly thankful for the extra rest. But so there wasn't any issues as far as, what am I going to do? I can't believe that, I can't go this next section yet. But there was always just a little more logistics planning than I think the most average hiker does. And it was sort of a bunch of hoops to have to jump through, but glad I did.
It does seem the perfect way to be fueled for endurance. I've always thought, I know people who are really into sport sometimes run up against issues being on keto when it's a sprinting type sport, but an endurance, it seems, to be fat fueled for that seems to be the perfect way to do it.
Oh, I definitely found it to be that to be true. And one of the funny things was we started, when I say I had a hiking partner, a friend of mine that was always my go-to backpacking buddy. So he and I started this together. We set off from what's called Campo, is where the southern point of the trail starts. So we set off from Campo together and we ended up hiking, I want to say, 3 or 4 weeks before we eventually parted ways, and all of our friends back home were like, what happened? And all that happened was our paces were different. And so he was typically the typical hiker diet. So his resupplies were, cheap carbs. Snickers bars are a big one because they're dense and easy to carry. And his father is a doctor. And as we were being dropped off at the border, his father literally said, like, you're not going to make it 100 miles. Like, we expect you to have to bail on this diet and like, we'll find a way to resupply you some other way. And I'm like, nope. This isn't going to happen. It's going to be fine. Put my fingers in my ears and started hiking. But yeah, halfway, not halfway, like 3 or 4 weeks through, that first section, like, my hiking buddy and I sort of had a bit of a meeting where we're just like, I, as a ketogenic hiker, I have more sustained energy. And so I wanted to hike longer, and hike further into the night. And I didn't need as many breaks as he did. And so I found myself getting frustrated at the frequent stops. And like, we'd hit a mountain and he was far faster than I, and he would sprint up that hill. And I'd find him at the top, just like taking a 15-20 minute break and refueling. And I was like, I don't need to stop. So I'm going to keep going. And so that frustrated him because then he felt like we weren't hiking together. And so our paces just didn't match at all. And a lot of the other hikers that we were kind of in a bubble with, not necessarily hiking with, but had met up along the trail and were kind of leapfrogging each other. They also were typically fueled. And so they would sprint up these hills far faster than I was. I certainly was not a fast hiker. But then they would want to crash early and they'd want to be in bed, 5, 6 o'clock at night. And I was like, I have 2-3 more hours of energy in me. And that's another 5-6 miles that I can kind of just cruise through. And so, yeah, for about a month in, we just decided to part ways. And I started hiking solo at that point, and it was definitely the best decision. But, a bunch of other hikers, having never seen a ketogenic hiker and not really being familiar with, keto for endurance or keto as like an athletic endeavor, were fascinated by what I was eating, and they did not understand it. Like, it did not compute in their heads that you didn't need to eat Snickers bars, guys. Like, you can do this on, freeze-dried like meals and fats, and it's going to be fine. So it was cool to watch everyone sort of like their minds explode a little bit when I tried to explain what I was eating, that I didn't have sugar at all in my system. But the other cool thing was that ketogenic food is lighter. Just calories per ounce math is just way better than carbs. And so my bag weighed lighter. And so every time I would pick up a mail drop, and we would compare, okay, cool, we're both hiking the exact same length of time. Like, everyone is heading to the same trail town next. So we both know that, it's going to be 5 days of food, and we would hold up our bags or weigh them on scales. My bag was consistently lighter. And it was just this cool little badge of like, I know what I'm doing. I'm doing this right by my body, but also like, this is literally easier for me than it is for you.
Yeah, that's got to be a plus, isn't it? My bag's lighter.
Oh yeah, like through hiking is not a competitive sport, but it's nice to know that like you're making slightly better decisions than those around you, or that like hiking's hard. Through hiking is really hard. I lost 3 toenails during this trek. And like the body weight just like falls off of you because you're just burning 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 calories a day, and you physically can't carry enough food to like keep that up. So your body is just cruising through all of the fat on your body. And my body stayed healthy looking the entire trail. I think I like to refer myself as fluffy beforehand. I wasn't necessarily out of shape, but I was certainly not like a lean athlete. And I finished looking not that drastically different. I just looked more in shape. And my other hiker friends finished looking emaciated and like they had just been on a calorie restricted diet for 5 months. And they all put the pounds right back on when they got off trail because their metabolisms were still cruising through, but they weren't moving anymore. And my body responded normally. I didn't gain that much weight when I came home. I didn't lose that much weight when I was on trail. And it was because of keto.
That's a really interesting difference, actually. And I mean, I imagine your food was much more nutrient dense, the kind of things you were eating. Have you any idea, on the calorific difference between what you were consuming a day? Because, and the only reason I mention that, I don't really like talking about calories and counting calories with keto, but, obviously it's quite important that you've got to get a minimum number in. You talk about expending thousands and thousands of calories a day. So it's obviously quite important to get that in. And I would pretty well guarantee that your food had a much better nutrient density profile. But what about the calories? Do you know how that compared to your fellow hikers?
Yeah. So we did the math when I came home. We blogged along the way. I say my partner Christopher and I, he kind of from the home perspective and I from the trail perspective of what it was like to keep keto on trail. And so the math is available. We ran through it, both of us sort of type A nerds, at nextmilemeals.com. So if you have any questions, if your listeners have any questions like about what it was like on trail or like the math behind this, like visit us online. But that math, if I remember correctly, ended up being, if we viewed 3,000 calories as sort of like the base rate for a backpacker, not necessarily for a thru hiker, you need a little bit more. But weekend hikers on a strenuous, trek, that's pretty normal. To pack 3,000 calories on like a fueled by candy kind of perspective, it ends up being about like 1.5 pounds, like 1.4 pounds. When you do that same math, when you actually are fat fueled and you take away the carbs, the same calories, the same 3,000 calories weighs less than a pound. It's 0.93 pounds. And so to the average, ketogenic person out there, counting calories and counting like how much that food weighs may not, seem that relevant. But, when you're hiking, making sure you're getting the right amount of fuel is where calorie counting actually does come into play, not necessarily from a weight loss perspective, but making sure that you have the right fuel amount, and how much weight you're carrying in your bag. So, if half a pound is the difference between a typical day and you're going 4 days, that's an extra 2 pounds on your back. And that weight adds up over time. And so any chance you have to like shave a little bit of weight off of your pack is incredibly crucial. There's an entire world of ultralight backpacking. And I kind of poke fun at them, but I sort of am one in that, we cut our toothbrushes in half so that we don't have to carry an extra like 5 grams of plastic in our bag. All the tags on our clothing are cut off to like slowly shave away those grams here and there. And so when you look at all these tiny little adjustments you make to weight in your backpack, and here you have this like, by eating a different way, not only do you have more energy, but you also like can save, half a pound a day. That adds up. And I feel like the ultralight backpacking community hasn't quite figured out that this might actually be the best ultralight strategy.
For sure. Well, I was just chuckling there because, my producer editor, when he's listening to this, I can remember him talking when I was over at Keto Fest. He was having a conversation about how much different pairs of shoes weighed and things because, he's a nomadic worker. So yeah, he knows all about exactly how much things weigh because he has to, well, not only carry them around, but, shipping around on planes and things, it gets crucial, doesn't it? How much your bag weighs. But, yes, so that was making me chuckle as I was listening to you talking about cutting toothbrushes in half and things. But like you say, yes, it makes perfect sense from so many perspectives that it's going to be the best way for people doing this to eat. And I should imagine nobody particularly wanted to convert to keto part way through, but I'm guessing you probably gained some followers and people who were interested for their next hike to start looking at changing, switching to a ketogenic way of fueling through.
For sure. The one piece of advice I always give, would-be ketogenic hikers, is make sure you're keto adapted before you start. You do not want to go through that transition of your body having to figure out a different fuel source, 200, 300 miles in. That sounds miserable. And so I had been keto for, about 2 years at that point. And it had been a choice of mine for a bunch of different reasons, not necessarily weight loss, but I found myself like I was losing hair, my skin was terrible, and my energy was awful. And so my doctor like casually mentioned this idea of like, try keto. And I was like, oh, I've been doing that for years. My dad used to be on Atkins. I'm like familiar with the principles of ketogenic diets. And so she was like, yeah, but have you actually tried it and like committed to it? So I was like, oh, I guess not. I've been doing lazy keto for a very, very long time. Like if you squint, pancakes are keto, right? And so I decided to buckle down. And so the 2 years prior to me going on this hike were pretty strict. And we keep a ketogenic, household. So like there's nothing that strays too far from that like healthy lifestyle. And so I was fully adapted before I hit the trail. The idea of hitting the trail and then choosing to go keto when your body's already figured out how to fuel its source, like that sounds atrocious, and I do not recommend that. But that being said, I found a bunch of hikers on trail who had been low carb before and thought this was off limits to them, that they did not think it was going to be possible, just as I didn't, that they could go through this hike, that they could, do 30 miles a day, that they could finish in 5 months with 2,600 miles behind them and stay keto or stay low carb the entire time. And so they met me, and at first I found myself there, like people would look at my food sources and they'd be like, well, what are you eating? I'm like, oh, I'm keto. I'd have to explain what keto is to them. But more often than not, I found people that knew exactly when I said keto, their faces just lit up because they previously thought this was off limits to them. I ran into a couple diabetics who were carrying insulin in their bags, which you want to talk about bag weight. Like that's a commitment to, keeping to your hobbies despite health limitations. And they just like their faces, like one of them almost started crying. Like she was just like, I didn't think that, she's like, I keep keto in real life to help me manage this diabetes. And I didn't think that this was available to me. Like, oh my goodness, like, are you ever going to like, where did you buy these? Can I buy these from you? And I'm like, I don't know. This is the thing people want. Oh my God. So, between that and, while I was on trail and blogging about it, a bunch of other people with legitimate health issues, whether that be Crohn's or celiacs or, people that use keto to treat epilepsy, they were just messaging me saying like, this is great. Like I'm so inspired that you were able to do this. I didn't think that backpacking was a thing I could participate in anymore, for these health reasons and the fact that keto food isn't available in stores. So yeah, we went through. Nobody switched over to keto while I was on trail. But I did launch the website while I was on trail just to be like, is there anybody else that's thinking about this, that like is interested in the idea of ketogenic backpacking food or the strategy behind it or how to make it work? And so when I was about halfway through in a little town called Shasta, Northern California, I holed up in a little library there, for a couple hours, and I launched the website. And by the time I finished a couple months later, there was thousands of names just clamoring for like, let me know when you get back. Like, if you're ever going to like launch this as a food company, we want to like participate. Like, we'll sign up as like pre-orders, like clamoring for this product. And so I was like, wow, this is like an unserved community that like I've got to be a part of, and like maybe we can help make other people's hikes possible. So we launched Next Mile Meals, and it's been amazing to see the other stories from other ketogenic hikers come through in that past year.
Wow, how satisfying. I was just thinking there. So you say it's really not difficult. I was just trying to think of foods that you could supply yourself with that, that are already existing without having to make something. And, I'm thinking of things like beef jerky and things, but I suppose it's just would be such a limited palette for such a long period of time. It's the kind of things that you could fuel yourself for, maybe up to a week, but it's not something that you could do for, 4 to 6 months with what's already out there.
You can. You would be bored. And everybody that I've talked to who is eating conventionally or like I joke, fueled by candy, they say like, how could you eat the same things every day? Like my daily meals, and I post these online, are, you could buy them in grocery stores. It's local, salami that doesn't have a lot of sugar in it. It's hard cheeses that can keep for a couple of days unrefrigerated. Nuts, avocados are, God's gift to keto backpackers. Like it's in its own little pre-contained case. These are all things that are totally purchasable in a store, but you're going to eat the same thing every day. You got to be okay with monotony. And the other hikers that turned up their nose at like, how do you eat the same thing every day? I asked them to dump out their bags. And I'm like, you're literally eating the same thing every day too. You're just changing the name of the candy bar that you're eating. So, Monday is Snickers Day. Tuesday is, M&M's Day. Like that's variety if you squint, but it wasn't when you're backpacking, food selection is a top priority. all hikers suffer from the same. We miss fresh vegetables. There were a couple of days where the first day you hike out of camp or out of a trail town, you purchase as much fresh food as you possibly can, and you eat it all that first day before it goes bad. So like even the crunch of celery was like heavenly to me at that time, but it was also heavenly to the typical hiker eating a conventional diet too. So it's limited, but it's limited because that's the activity, not because it's ketogenic.
Right. Yes, I see. But so tell me about some of the foods you make, because I've had a look at them on the website. I have to say they do look pretty delicious.
Yeah. Before I left for the trail and before launching this as a company was even a possibility, I was trying to figure out like, how do I get through the monotony of eating the same thing day after day? And so I was like, cool, well, if I can eat a different thing every night for like 6 days in a row, then that's not monotony. And so we tested out a bunch of different recipes, and we ended up with 6 flavors that were like beef tacos with, freeze-dried bell peppers that look like the food you're eating. They don't look like some, processed white carb goo. And some of the other flavors are like meatball marinara with real marinara sauce that we like freeze dry and make ourselves. We have a chicken curry that I've revamped a couple times to get it just ever so perfect, because curry is one of my favorite things, and so I wanted to make sure that if I loved it, everybody else would love it too. So we have three beef flavors and 3 chicken flavors, and they're all equally popular, which is so cool to see. I thought that everyone would have their own favorites, and there's definitely this team, hot wings chicken, and then there's another team that loves the deli roast beef, and so the flavors are cool. The meal recipes are cool. We're going to launch breakfast soon, and those are so good. We had to try them on a kayaking trip recently, and we're just really excited to have those rolled out too. But mostly we've been excited, not so much by everyone's favorite foods, but people like take these amazing photos of them eating these meals on these incredible hikes. We had this one guy send us photos from the Grand Tetons, and he was like, this would not have been possible if not for your product. Thank you so much for like making these. And that's what gets us through our day. Like, we love seeing the heights and the peaks and the vistas that these meals are taken to them. Like, man, our products go to better places than we do.
Gosh, yeah, that's really fulfilling, isn't it? So from the practical point of view, it's a bit like a pot noodle thing, is it? For you just sort of pour boiling water in and that's it. Do you have to cook them at all, or is it as simple as that?
Yeah, so typical backpacking food is all freeze-dried or dehydrated. The idea being carrying water is heavy. By far, the heaviest thing you can carry in your backpack is a bottle of water, which made getting through the desert section very hard. So if you already have to carry water to hydrate yourself, you want to make sure your food is freeze-dried or dehydrated, so you're not just carrying unnecessary weight. And so, again, walk into a conventional backpacker, outdoor camping store, and everything on the shelf is like, it's sealed in these bags, which you open up, you boil some water on your little stove, and you fill it up to a certain line, you seal it, and you just like set the timer for like 5 or 10 minutes. And a lot of the stuff we'd had in stores were just sort of like monotonous, and it was like insert name of carb here plus insert sprinkling of protein here. So it's like chicken and rice or mac and cheese, and it was like wash, rinse, repeat. It was the same boring carb stuff over and over again. And so we know the strategy is correct. It's freeze-dried food, and you rehydrate it on trail, and you make this like warm, filling, hearty meal. The only difference is that our ingredients are real. Like our list of ingredients on each bag is short. There's no chemicals. There's nothing there added as filler. Everything's pronounceable, which is really cool. And yeah, so you heat up a little mug of water, you dump it in, you seal it, and it rehydrates by itself. And so you end up with, a nice warm meal at the end of each day.
Fantastic. And people are properly fueling themselves, when it's really important to fuel yourself adequately, and yes, not end up at the other end looking emaciated.
Yeah, no one's talking about bonking on our, there's no carb wall where you've run through all of your glucose stores and you suddenly like run out of energy and you have to stop and like refuel. And that was the cool thing. Like, I powered by a bunch of hikers that were like pulled over on the side of the trail and just like shoving candy bars into their face to try to get them over the next 5 or 6 miles over a particularly rough stretch. And I would just like wave, ask them if they were okay, like, and they're fine. And I would just keep hiking. And a lot of people I never saw again because I was moving too fast.
And tell me about the practical aspect of making this kind of food. I read somewhere on your blog that you found that you actually had to start using leaner cuts of meat because it was difficult to dehydrate the fattier cuts, and you found that you were having to do it with lean and then add some more fat back in at the end. That kind of, what happened there?
Oh, yeah. I am not a food science person. And so if you had asked me a couple of years ago, like, would you care about the dehydration, ratio and ability of different types of meat, I would have laughed at you. But yeah, what ends up happening is, fatty foods are really hard to freeze dry. The fat goes rancid much faster than protein does. And so, to be able to freeze dry or dehydrate things like bacon, they go bad faster. I mean, freeze dried food can keep for 5 or 10 years if it's preserved correctly. Fatty food doesn't last that long. And so we had to find this balance between, ketogenic person, you're fat fueled. How do you make sure you're getting, enough fat, not too much protein, definitely low carbs, in a way that, is preservable long term. So you have to carry it and it can't go bad for a couple of days. Or a lot of people put the meals in emergency kits. And so they don't get eaten for a couple of years. And that's fine. The way that we've made our meals is they're rather protein heavy. They have a lot of cheese to add fat back in. And then we recommend a bunch of really easy options to add calories. And so, one thing I did on trail, because, again, a lot of protein, not as much fat as we needed to get through 4,000 or 5,000 calorie burn days, was I made it like a little bottle of olive oil and I just carried that with me. Or, some stores carry single packets of coconut oil, which is, I highly recommend in our curry. It's really great. And there's a whole bunch of fatty oils you can add in during the day. And normal hikers, conventional hiking food does this too. Every hiker I saw, we were sharing strategies on how to carry oil in our bag without it leaking, which for the record, I highly recommend getting a travel size bottle of baby oil, emptying it out, cleaning it really well and dumping it in there because that bottle's already made to carry oil cleanly. That's my little side tip. But we were sharing strategies because all of us were doing the same thing. We were just doing it with different food and we just needed to find ways to just cram calorie dense food in there. And even though they didn't realize it, they were using keto strategies. They were packing, oil, which was the most, calorific dense food that they could in their bags. And they just weren't, being consistent throughout their diet. So, we all benefited from the same principles. It's just, I was fat adapted and they weren't.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So you're out there in the wilderness, and this is the kind of wilderness that I'm not used to. Used to France and the UK, and okay, there are some wild animals out in the woods, near where I live, but there are things like deer and some wild boar and things like that, which okay, potentially can do you some damage. But I imagine on your hiking trail, did you potentially come across some things that could kill you? I always like to, I say the animals that you encounter are far more afraid of you than they are of them. But yeah, one of the biggest questions I get asked is, did you see snakes or bears? And the answer is yes to both of those. Throughout the desert, I think I ran into a rattlesnake every day. And when I first started, I was horrified, not by the running into the snakes, but by oh my gosh, the monotony. I have to listen to podcasts and I want to be able to listen to music to kind of power through the endless hours of walking and hiking. And I learned very quickly that was not safe. When you have headphones in, you don't hear a rattlesnake's rattle. And so we were running into them on a daily basis. They love to sun themselves on the trail. And so I was just hiking with one earbud in, just so that I could hear the warning rattle. And we ran into them often. To my knowledge, there's never been a rattlesnake bite on a hiker, on a PCT hiker. All of us are pretty well trained to keep an eye out for them, but I was surprised by how often we saw them. And then we had a couple bear incidences where they came in to other people's camps and we heard stories. I ran into 2 on trail, but the trail hikes through black bear country and not grizzly bear country. And so the bears we run into, if you just make a loud noise and make clear that you are walking towards them, they will run away. My trail name was Pipes because I sang all the time on trail. And so it just became my easy way to scare animals away, was to just sing at the top of my lungs whatever Disney song was on my radar at that time. But no major animal incidences. The scariest time was we heard a loud noise in the middle of the night and all of us were in our respective tents, just eyes open, listening to something very large walk through camp. Turns out it was just a herd of deer. They were just looking for grass in the area. And so we felt very silly after that. But no, yeah, you're in the wilderness. This is their home, not ours. And so it just pays to pay attention and be aware of your surroundings. Yes, I can see that. It is just being mindful and sensible by the sounds of it. Like you say, keeping one ear for that having a rattlesnake ear at all times.
Yes, for sure.
Fantastic. So yes, it sounds like people must have been a little bit jealous watching you tuck into tacos.
Yeah, I think that, it started out as, sort of a nose turned up. Like, I think everybody felt that they got to kind of relive their inner, fifth grader. They got to eat candy all day and they got to eat mac and cheese all day. And, there she is over in the corner eating like veggies, like freeze dried zucchini. That doesn't sound very good. But then after a couple of days, they got really bored with their meals and I was still eating these really tasty meals. And so again, we're all eating sort of the same monotonous things and I got to have variety. And so, yeah, a bunch of non-keto hikers were constantly asking me like, hey, can you like send a message to your partner at home and have him like ship out a couple for me next time? And, on days where we had too many, we were moving faster than we expected and I had an extra meal or two, I would always leave them in what's called a hiker box. If you have too much food or gear that you want to leave behind, there's always like a box of, take a little, leave a little sort of thing. So I'd always leave a meal or two behind for the next hiker to partake if they wanted to. So, it became known along trail. I would run into people further ahead and they'd be like, oh, we heard about you. You have these meals and they're supposed to be so good. So, it was cool to kind of have that little bit of like, I'm eating things that are better than what's currently available for sure.
And presumably, this is a product that is going to be appealing, to everyone, not just, obviously it's going to be a game changer for hikers who want to stay keto, but even those who don't, it sounds like it's going to appeal to them too anyway.
Yeah, we've been so surprised. We thought that this would be a hiker, niche field of just people like me who just were looking for a way to stay keto in the woods. And then we started getting photos and messages from we like, for instance, we thought that, season ended around like Labor Day, summer's over, kids go back to school, we go back to work, hiking season must stop, right? And suddenly that was when hunting season started. And so we started getting a bunch of hunters over the fall who are going out on these elk hunts or these bighorn sheep hunts in Alaska. And I'm not a hunter, but I was just like, oh, there's other people who have difficulty staying keto in these like really harsh environments. That's a market we hadn't even thought about. And, we have a couple people on the East Coast who are just really busy at work and they just don't want to cook. And they are just, every week we get an order from them and a thank you so much for existing. Like you've made me, much more able to stay keto and avoid all the donuts in the office. So everything from big elk hunters in Colorado to, conference goers on the East Coast and we had a bunch of Boy Scouts who were like, trying to keep keto for other health reasons in their family. And they got to go on their backpacking trip this summer. So hikers and hunters and kayakers and just busy business people, everyone's excited to have easy keto food again.
Yes, well, to be honest, the number of people I know who like to grab a pot noodle for lunch, I mean,
yeah.
it's the same easy thing, but you actually get some nutrients into you rather than, a pot of rubbish and MSG. So this was, this was a big change that you got used to, but obviously, you went into it expecting this to be a change. You knew you were going to have 4 to 5 months ahead of you that were going to be very different from what you were used to. I imagine the other end must have been a bit difficult. What was it like, going from that and trying to assimilate back into normal life again?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's funny. Everyone likes to talk about the trail. And then I always say like, one of the hardest things was coming home. When we crossed into Canada, like we were like, at that point I was hiking with what I like to call a trail family. We had met, about 1,300 miles prior to that outside of a little town in California. And so we've been hiking together every single day. And we crossed into Canada together as a group and all started crying. Like this like moment of just like total emotion just came over us. And none of us were particularly, emotional people or prone to crying, but we just like kind of had this like, well, what now moment? Like it's the thing we wanted to do is done. And where do we go now? Okay, well, I guess back to real life. And so, as I remember sitting in the airport in Seattle. So we crossed into Canada, in a place called Manning Park. And then you get a ride into like either the Vancouver or the Seattle area. And then you just sort of fly home back to wherever you came from. And so I came from San Francisco. And so I was waiting in an airport in Seattle, and I had my bag there, which at the end of a hike, your bag smells terrible. And I just remember like getting this whiff of it and being like, oh my goodness, it smells like a dead corpse. I hope nobody else knows that that's me. And I'm just sitting there with this like bag and these trekking poles, and I'm just waiting for my plane to get called. And I just had this like moment of like, nobody here knows about this thing that I just did. Like, I'm just like sitting back in real life and that entire culture and like process, like you walk into a trail town, while you're hiking and like they know you're a hiker. The towns love having you there. They love that you're doing this. They're incredibly encouraging. And you, for 5 months, like this entire culture, every person you meet knows what you're doing, is supportive of what you're doing, or is also doing it with you. And then to re-enter real life and have nobody know that this is a thing you did. And not to say you're looking for recognition, but it just feels very jarring that like you all could have also hiked for 5 months and you're not, and you should, and it's great. But I got home and prior to the trail, I think I was very extroverted and talkative, and I certainly still am, and I talk a mile a minute. But I got home and social interactions were exhausting, because I'd only ever really talked to 4 or 5 people at a time, and I would only see them, when we woke up and when we maybe stopped for lunch midday and back when, we crashed at the end of the day. And so my partner Christopher planned a welcome home party for me, and, 20, 30 of my good friends showed up in a park. And I was just like, I'm so happy to see you all, but oh my God, am I tired? And I just want to go home, and I just want to like crawl under the covers. And like I lost my voice that day because I wasn't used to talking so much. And so readjustment was a process. I became a little bit more introverted. I wanted to like be outdoors a little bit more. Some of the other weird changes were like, I hadn't walked on concrete for a long time. And so walking in my kitchen was very difficult. Tile hurt. I was wearing very much like old lady memory foam slippers for about 3 or 4 months to get used to that again. My feet had grown like 2 sizes.
What?
Yeah, I don't recommend it. It's
What? That's like a permanent thing. That's not just a sort of feet swelling.
Oh yeah, I was really hoping it was a temporary thing. That is sadly not true. Yeah, your feet grow and they swell for sure, but they also like your body becomes like this like hiking machine. So a bunch of changes happen where like my stride changed. My partner and I joke that like we used to be able to walk hands and like have the same pace, and now my stride's longer, and so like we constantly tease each other that we can't like hold hands and walk down the street anymore. Like your body becomes more efficient at walking, and so one of those changes is that the bones in your feet spread out to like create a bigger surface area, and that did not change when I got home. And so now I'm just constantly looking for like wide width shoes in the store, which let me tell you, the variety available to you is not great. But yeah, that was a change I was not expecting. I wasn't expecting my stride length to have altered. My body composition, I think, has permanently changed. I'm roughly back to the same weight that I was before I hit trail, but the makeup of that, the muscle versus fat is drastically different. Yeah, there's just like a bunch of like funny little things. I still have a spot of sunburn on my back that like I think is permanently scarred, which that can't be good for skin cancer. So highly recommend you wear sunscreen if you ever go hiking. Yeah, there's funny changes and like both like mental and physical, but it's been a really cool thing to like look back on and have done, and hopefully one day to do again.
Yeah, for sure. And did you find you had to compensate? Because, I mean, how many miles on average were you walking every day?
25 on average.
So to go from doing that for, this 4 to 5 months, that's a long period of time, to come back, did you find that you needed to at least keep up some of that?
I think the first couple of days, yeah, my body just wanted to move. And I tried jogging for a little bit. I'm not a jogger. I power to people that can do that. I can't. And so I was seeking out a bunch of activity first couple of days. I got home, and then your body just like naturally wants to conserve energy. And so when it realized it wasn't walking anymore, it was like, cool, don't ever move. And I just like crashed on the couch, and I got caught up on all the shows that I had missed over the summer. We were on like a Game of Thrones. Nobody tell Jessie what happened. And so I like cruised through like those binge watching sessions. And I think I was far more lazy than my other hiker friends. My other hiker friends started running marathons, and they just like found the next hike to go do, and they wanted to stay active a little bit more. I was just happy to be home. I had, family and friends to look forward to coming back to. And like my dog was here to be happy to see me. And so I got to like re-enter normal life. And so I think I just enjoyed that a bit more than trying to maintain the activity level that I had before. But that is to say, like, man, when your body is like a hiking machine like that, like it feels really good. Like you feel strong. And I hadn't really fully understood what that meant. Or like, what a runner's high was, and like that endorphin feeling of every day kind of just feeling really good about how you felt. I think everybody suffers from like aches and pains and, like lethargy every once in a while. But, when you're hiking 25, 30 miles a day and you're eating clean and you're not, consuming, super chemical laden foods during that time. And if your exercise ended every day with like a massive mountain vista waiting for you, like more people would exercise. And so it was cool to kind of balance those two and try to find ways to incorporate that again in real life.
And I guess just the benefits of being outside and in the fresh air every day, it's not to be underestimated, is it?
Oh, it's great. And each night the stars were incredible. One of my regrets on trail was that I didn't see more, midnight skies and the Sierras and through the mountaintops, because when you're hiking that far, you're exhausted. And most of us fell asleep like as the sun was going down at like 6, 7 p.m. And we're just like, cool. And we'll just wake up at dawn and just start hiking again. So there weren't enough stars. I didn't get to see enough stars, but otherwise, yeah, you're in solitude and you have time to think, which can be a good or a bad thing. You can either dwell on things too long or, process some emotional stuff. And so I didn't hike for emotional reasons. A lot of people do. There's movies made about finding yourself on the PCT or the Appalachian Trail. And that wasn't my motivation. I wasn't looking for, this incredible soul seeking adventure, but I was looking for the outdoors. I was looking for the fresh air and the solitude and, to be able to say that, I was, at any given time, maybe 8 days at one point from the nearest civilization. Like that's incredibly remote. Again, we did it during a high snow year, a record snow year. And so a lot of people skipped the Sierras. And so we decided to power through. Not sure that was the best decision. It was certainly dangerous. I think that the people that skipped it were a little bit smarter than I was, but that meant that it was incredibly sparse through that section. And so, there was a time where the only person that I saw, for almost, I think it was like 7.5 days, was the guy that I was hiking with at the time, just a brand new hiker out of, I think he was from Austin, Texas. And we just like randomly were there at the entrance of the Sierras at the same time. And we kind of looked at each other. We're like, okay, sure. Let's hike together. We have the same pace. And like total stranger to me. And we just ended up hiking through the Sierras. And he was the only person I saw for weeks through some of the treacherous sections of that hike. And to be that remote, to like not see another soul for that long is an experience that most people don't get to have. Most people, have cell phones and, texting access or see other people. Like there was no cell service. There was no internet. It was just like him and I in silence walking. And each night we'd go to our tents and the next morning we'd wake up and keep hiking again. And that sort of solitude and fresh air was absolutely why I hiked. And it's something everybody should experience.
Oh gosh. So yes, that's an example where, you must have been completely reliant on each other. If there's no cell service, no nothing. That's, potentially dangerous if something happens. Is that? And that's something I was going to ask you, actually. Were you always with somebody? Presumably, from a safety point of view, it's not a good idea to ever be completely on your own.
So, you can solo hike it. And so I hadn't intended to solo hike it. I started with a friend. And like I said before, we ended up parting ways just because of pace mismatch. And so I hiked the first 500 miles with a friend. Was it 500 miles? I think it was 500 miles. And then the next 200 were by myself. And so you might cross by people who are on their own breaks. Like you're moving as kind of a herd. And so you can go the entire day and not see anybody, but that's because somebody could be 2 miles ahead of you hiking at your exact same pace. You just happen to never cross paths. So you actually don't know how close or far the next person is. And so that section I did by myself. And I'm so glad I did. It never felt unsafe. The first night I camped by myself, I was absolutely terrified because you're just alone in the desert and you can hear like coyotes and there's tarantulas and there's scorpions and you're just like, this is fine. I'm not scared. I'm an adult. This is cool. But then you wake up the next morning and you're like watching the sunrise over the desert and you like make coffee by yourself and you're just alone. And it's really cool. It's a really great feeling. So yeah, that section I did by myself. And then when the Sierras, when we knew that it was a bad snow year and it was really treacherous and we'd heard some reports that a couple hikers had actually passed away from being swept downriver and we were evaluating whether or not hikers in general should go through that section, that's when I found somebody else who was also kind of going through that mental evaluation of like, do I want to hike this solo or not? And so he and I just sort of like teamed up and took it on together for those safety reasons. And we're really glad we did. There was a couple sections where he or I slipped or fell or like took a stumble in a river, and had the other person not been there, I don't want to think about what would have happened. But at one point we crossed a river that had blown its banks, and it was supposed to be a creek in a normal year, and it was instead a 1/4 mile wide river. And we had to wait for the the snow melt to recede. So we woke up at 5 a.m. to try to cross it before the waters rose too heavily. And we crossed on our inflatable air mattresses as like a kind of like a little raft to kick across. And we got to the other side, freezing and shivering and crying a little bit from the fear. And he and I just like looked at each other. We're like, we just did a really dumb thing. That was not smart. And then we ended up parting ways right after the Sierras. And my partner came out and hiked with me for a little bit. So I wasn't alone then. But then, then he went home back to his day job, and I hiked on alone for another couple 100 miles before meeting up with my trail family, who we all had great paces together. We enjoyed seeing each other. And so I finished the hike not alone. I finished the hike with 4 other awesome people that I still keep in touch with. So you can do it all the different ways. It's definitely better to have people around you for safety reasons, but people hike it alone all the time, and it's a totally valid way of doing it.
But I imagine, there's a difference between, I can see the advantages of actually setting out on your own, but it sounds like there's this community all the way around. It would only be a case probably of waiting for a while, and you can pick up with somebody else. I imagine it's quite a friendly community where people are up for that.
Yeah, the thing that's unsafe about the PCT is the terrain. The people are incredible. The kind of person that decides to quit their job and walk off into the woods for 5 months is not the serial killer personality. Not a single person that I ran into, none of my fellow hikers did I ever feel unsafe around. There's this incredible camaraderie and like sharing culture of, oh, you need Advil? I have Advil. Like, here you go. Do you need bandages? I've got bandages. Like, we're all in this like shared state of pain, with grins on our faces, and we're all just really excited to be out there. It's an experience that very few people in the world ever get to have, to be able to quit your job and to just sort of do something for fun for that long. There's this idea of like, well, is it fun? Is it fun to have done in the past, or is it fun to be doing it at the time? And it wavers back and forth depending on the day, but to be able to kind of tackle that as a group and to have that shared experience together is awesome. And it creates bonds that, like I said before, I still stay in touch with my trail family because we went through a really cool thing together, a really hard thing together. And it's a sense of accomplishment at the end that I had not experienced before. The question I get asked all the time is, well, why did you hike it? And the reasoning I always give is, again, it wasn't soul searching. It was just it was a hard thing to have done, to put yourself through. That all the hard things I've ever done in my life, were sort of things I didn't have the choice to opt out of, whether they're like family or friend situations. Like, you sign up for them and you have to make them work. This was a hard thing that I could opt out of at any time. And so to wake up each morning and make a deliberate decision to keep going and to lace up my frozen shoelaces and to put on my like still wet cargo pants from the day before, on toes that were missing toenails at that point, and like to go, this is fine. Like, I'm choosing to do this. That was a sense of accomplishment, to put yourself through a really hard thing, prove you could do it, and to come out the other side with a really cool story and memories attached to it.
And yes, I mean, it is a massive, massive thing to accomplish. Were there points along the way where you did feel like giving up? I mean, there must have been, but did you ever come close to actually making that call and saying, right, that's it, I'm getting on a plane, I'm going home now?
Yeah, I think that it got difficult at a bunch of different times, but the very first time that I thought to myself, I don't want to be here, like, this is silly, I don't know, like, I don't want to keep going. It was a couple days after my partner came out and hiked with me he came out for about 2 weeks. And so I'd gotten to see him again. It was, when you're in a relationship on trail, it's very much like being in a long distance relationship, but imagine a long distance relationship with no cell service. And so I would reach the top of a mountain and I'd like anxiously call him and say hi or text him. And so he came out for such a long stretch of time, and it was so great to see him again and to like hear from my friends and like hear what they were doing. And then when he went back to his day job and regular life, and I was alone and hiking alone again, about 3 days after that, I just like had this moment on top of this mountain outside of Lake Tahoe where I was like, why am I doing this? This is terrible. I'm miserable. I miss my friends and family. I just want to go home. And like, had there been a road or a car that was available to me at that moment, I would have 100% gone home. I was so unhappy and in so much pain. And I'd already gone through the hardest part of the trail. The Sierras were behind me. There was nothing else ahead of me that was going to break me physically. It was just all emotional. And I'd been on trail for, I guess, about 3 months at that point, and just sort of just did not understand why I was still there. Like didn't understand that this was the thing that I wanted to keep doing. But the nice thing is, and I don't know if this is a nice thing, but the good thing for continuation is that the bad days happen where you can't really get out. The only place you can keep going is you have to go forward. So if you decide that you're done and you want to go home, you still got to hike a day or two to like get to the nearest town. And in that time, things change. So by the time that I decided I wanted to go home and this was not okay anymore, I still had 2 days of hiking to get to Tahoe. And so by the time I got to Tahoe, I had run into my trail family and they were excited to meet me. And I was like super excited to meet them. And I was like, oh, people I can hike with. This is great. And then I got into town and I took a shower and I felt better. And then I got back on trail and I caught up with them. And so your bad days happen they're just not reachable areas. And so you don't have the option to go home. And so you're kind of forced to work through it. And if you get to town and you're having a good day, like then quit. Cool. But you got to make that decision on a good day. You don't get to quit on a bad day. And the nice thing about the trail is all your bad days happen where you can't quit.
And you talk about this trail family. These were just people you met during the hike?
Yeah. So they had been hiking together for a while. And they were their own hodgepodge crew. There was like two guy friends who had been high school buddies and just liked to do cross country bike trips together. And they decided this was just the next thing they wanted to try to do. And there was a lady from Telluride who started around the same time as them and was just like very early in her career, like early 20s. And then there was I forget what he does for a living. He's like a scientist out of Quebec. And so he's a French Canadian. And it was just this motley crew that just started hiking together. And one of the guys had a travel board of Settlers of Catan. And I was like aghast that they would carry a board game in their backpack. But every night they got together and they played board games and they drank whiskey and they laughed and kept hiking together. And I randomly stumbled upon them outside of Tahoe and was just super thrilled to meet people that were still happy to be there. And over the course of they were the people that I woke up with every morning and hiked with every day and went to sleep with next to, our tents were butt up against each other for the next 3 or 4 months. And so, yeah, trail families are a thing. And you end up sort of, my story was definitely not unique. Everybody sort of either finds other hiking buddies or other trail families, or you become a little bit of a nomad and you hopscotch between trail families. But, we're social people. And when you're alone for that long, being alone in the woods is great for the soul, but you still want to see people at the end of each night and know that there's people looking out for you. So I'm super thankful I ran into them.
Fantastic. And it sounds like the timing was perfect for that too, after you'd been feeling really miserable.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I could not have met them at a better moment of total despair.
And I know you didn't go into it from a soul-searching point of view, but was there anything, maybe something silly and surprising that you learnt about yourself through all this? I
think that the biggest takeaway I had was, I grew up in a family that wasn't super well off. We were food stamps and free lunch program. And my parents, tried their hardest to give us all the opportunities we ever had. But, I put myself through school. I worked all the way through college. And so I've always been a little bit hesitant to just quit my job and to take away my source of income. Feeling like that was a thing that, we struggled with for so long. And now I work in tech in the Bay Area. And that's a silly thing to walk away from. And so to be able to quit your job and to do a thing that fulfills you and makes you a happier person and to experience this once in a lifetime thing. And then to know that I could come back and it was okay that you can take these breaks and you can come back and you can find work later, that it's not you're permanently unemployed, that, that taking time for these things is still important. And I don't need to be so afraid all the time of or insecure of where my next paycheck's coming from, that, if I don't find a job when I come home, cool, then I'll launch a backpacking food company. I'll try something different. And so to be able to kind of allow myself that space to go explore new things and to make sure that my life still has adventure and to not be so tied to a desk job all the time. That was my big takeaway. I think others on trail, that was the other neat thing, was the different stories on trail. A bunch of people had just graduated college, and before they started the 9-to-5 jobs, they wanted to be able to explore. Or there's a bunch of retirees who the kids were off at college and this was their final chance to be cool, I have the free time to go do this. There was one couple that was doing it as their honeymoon adventure. And I thought that was just incredible. And I was sign me up for that. That sounds great. And so, yeah, to see everyone's different reasons for being there and to know that everybody came away with it with something very different, even though we literally walked the exact same trail, was incredibly rewarding. But yeah, my big takeaway was make time for those things. It's important. And the rest of your life will allow room for it if you let it.
Yes, that must be really interesting. And it's something I find fascinating, every week hearing people's stories on this podcast. So I can imagine that there must be some really interesting people you come across. You've got this thing that binds you, this love of hiking. So you've already got that in common. But yeah, there must be some really interesting people to meet, and you've got the time to sit down and hear their stories as you're hiking.
Yeah. There's no stereotypical hiker. It's not like it's just like, I think a lot of people were like, oh, it's just a thing that like young 18-year-old guys do. And like, that's not true. And it's not a thing that, college grads just do. And it's not a thing that, early 30 somethings like me do, or, only athletes do it. It really ran the spectrum. There was people in every age bracket. And I think that there's certainly life events that prohibit some, like married couples in their 40s who have kids. Like, that's not a thing you can just sort of walk away from and go tackle a thru hike. So there's definitely limiting factors in the audiences, but everyone's story was so different, and there really weren't stereotypes to kind of play into regarding who hikes the trail and who completes the trail and like what makes a successful thru hiker. Like I said earlier, there were people that their first day ever hiking was the first day on trail. They had never put on a backpack before. They just done their research, bought a thing, and then showed up on day one. There were people like me who are, avid backpackers, but hadn't really done anything longer than a week or two. There were some repeat thru hikers that had already done the PCT or the AT, or had, already hiked something else on another continent. But it ran the gamut, and we all learned from each other in different ways. Like the AT hikers, there was new gear in the market that the person who had never hiked before but was super research oriented had that they didn't have. So there wasn't ever any superiority from like one group or another. Everyone had a different story to tell. It was funny though. None of us really ever asked the question of like, why are you hiking the PCT? That wasn't ever a thing that we asked ourselves. A lot of other people who weren't hiking asked us, because it's an easy one to ask of, why would you quit your job and just walk for that long? But we sort of just had this, casual ease with each other, where it's just like, you're here for your own reasons. And, we might have questions about like, what kind of backpack do you have? What does your bag weigh? There's a bunch of really dorky things we all ask each other, but the why wasn't ever part of that.
No, I can see that actually, that it's a really personal thing that maybe someone might want to share with you, but I can see how it could potentially feel like, yeah, just that kind of thing that it's up to someone to share if they want to, but not the kind of the question you ask.
Yeah. It felt a lot like when you're at summer camp and you're in like as a kid, and like you become really fast friends with these people on a very superficial level. And occasionally you find people that you go really deep with, and you like create these lasting connections. But we were all friends. Like there wasn't any person that we like avoided, or like, oh, that person's a mile ahead of trail. Let's like not hike that far to not catch up to them. Like it's this very, group camaraderie. And, we say that, you're the PCT class of 2017, and this year's was the class of 2018, because the people that you completed had an experience that is different than the people that completed it the year before or the year after. We did it in a record snow year. So we got to experience the Sierras in its most like treacherous, deadly, pristine and isolating conditions. While this year's class of 2018, they dealt with a lot of fires. And at one point, the northern terminus, the thing you cross into Canada at that says that you did the thing you set out to do, closed because of a fire. I can't even imagine the heartbreaking experience of going, 2,500 miles only to be told the last 100 miles are closed. And so every year's class is incredibly different, but every year's class kind of has the same experience. And so when somebody tells me they did the PCT, the first question I always ask is, oh, what year? Because like that's actually more important than the fact that they did the PCT. It's a very drastically different experience each year.
Yes, I can see that. And you mentioned earlier it's a once in a lifetime experience. Is that how it is for you? Is it something you're going to do again? Are you going to do, a different through hiking experience, or is this you've done your once in a lifetime experience and that's it? I have a feeling that won't be the case for you.
Oh, you will see me on trail again. 100%. I knew I wanted to hike it again, like a little bit over halfway through. I knew that, again, each year changes. Each year's a different experience. I think it would be so cool to go back to the starting terminus and to know what I know now, to know what each section looks like, to know what the challenges were in each section, to like change what I carried, what I wish I had, what I wish I didn't need, and to go back and do it again with like a different lens, to know, I wish I'd taken more photos of the people that I interacted with, not so much the vistas. I wish I had, gone to a specific trail angel's house instead of, staying in a hotel. I wish I'd gotten to experience one thing and not the other. And so the trail changes each year, and I absolutely want to do it again. There's two other trails, which if you complete all three, it's called like the Triple Crown. So you through hiked the AT, the PCT, and the CDT. I don't have much desire to do the AT. It tends to be a little more town focused and what's called green tunnel. So you're going through these lush green forests, but it's just these, sort of rolling hills through the East Coast Appalachian. The PCT is far more of a drastic change, the desert section and then the Sierras, and then you're in Northern California and the Oregon and up through Washington and the Cascades. And then the CDT through the Continental Divide Trail, that's one I want to tackle. It's far less traveled than the others. It's through the most mountainous region of the country. And I think that just sounds incredible. So if I wanted to tackle one again, it would definitely be the CDT. There's also ones internationally. There's the Tarora in New Zealand, which is definitely on my wish list. So I'm definitely not done. I don't know when I'll tackle the next one, but it'll be soon.
The world is your oyster. And next time you'll get to see people eating your meals, which will be fun.
That would be a dream come true for sure.
That would be fantastic though, wouldn't it? You get to your place where you all sit down to eat and you get out yours and you see other people doing the same. That would be super rewarding.
Oh, I can't even imagine. That brings a smile to my face. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, for the kind of person who's not exercise driven, me, you have made it sound really, really exciting. I'm not sure I can ever imagine myself doing such a long trail, but you kind of think, I could maybe go and do a 2-week one or something. That sounds like the kind of challenge for me but you've made it sound exciting, I have to say.
Do it. Hiking is an exercise. I'm not a runner. I don't go to the gym. Like walking in the woods is a thing that everybody should experience. So don't view it as exercise, and like find a trip, whether it's a day hike or an overnight hike or a weekend backpacking trip. Like everybody should experience what it's like to carry everything you need to live on your back and to like set up camp and to pack it up the next day and to hike out. It's great. Everyone should see it.
That's very true. I'll have to take my dog with me. So you're going to have to come up with some dehydrated dog meals to
make
go
doggy
with.
Backpacks.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you today. Perhaps you could leave us with a top tip.
Sure. I think I mentioned it before, but it's worth repeating again. Like, don't ever quit on a bad day. Like, whether that's hiking or whether that's like, anything else in your life, whether that's your job and you're just having a rough day at work, like wait until it settles out, make sure it's not an emotional decision and then quit if you still want to quit, because then it's justified. But yeah, don't ever quit on a bad day.
That's a great tip. I love that. I love just the fact that you've got to think it through enough. Just like you were saying, that the chances are that when you are having a bad day, you're going to have to hike at least a day before you can do anything about it, by which time you'll have probably changed your mind. Or, if you do stay in that mindset, you'll at least have thought it through properly. And like you say, make that decision when you're in a better mood when you get there.
Exactly. Give it some chance. There's a reason you took whatever it is on in the first place. Like, make sure you're making that decision to leave it in the right headspace.
Fantastic. Yes, I can see that applying to all sorts of things. Great tip. Well, it's been fascinating and exhilarating, at least in my mind. Like I say, I can't see myself doing it, but I feel like I've shared it vicariously. It's been wonderful hearing all about your adventures, Jessie. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Lovely talking to you.
To get the resources and links from the show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you want to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. If you fancy joining me on this exciting adventure and want to help me create new episodes, please go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/ketowoman, or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It's thanks to the two keto dudes that I'm hosting this podcast. So please consider heading to their Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com and help them bring you more podcasts like this one. Please help other people hear about and find this podcast by reviewing the show on iTunes and Facebook. Every star and review really does help. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support means the world to me. Thank you. This week's end quote is from Nellie Bly. Nellie Bly was an American journalist, inventor and charity worker. Inspired by Jules Verne's novel, she set off around the world attempting to break the fictional account's 80-day record. And she did. She completed the journey in 1889, travelling nearly 25,000 miles, mostly alone. I've always had the feeling that nothing is impossible if one applies a certain amount of energy in the right direction. If you want to do it, you can do it. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.